January 17th, 2025. This was the release date of the Prismatic Evolution set. And with this set came along the greatest Pokemon card Pokemon has ever printed. Budew. Budew is a very simple Pokemon. It's a basic Pokemon with 30 HP and 1 attack. It does 10 damage. The attack doesn't cost any energy. However, it does have a little bit of text underneath that says, during your opponent's next turn, they can't play any item cards from their hand. And what does every single deck in the Pokemon trading card game rely on? Well, yeah, you guessed it, items. Budew prevents you from playing the most crucial part of your deck. Those items, Pokepads, Nest Balls, Buddy Buddy Poffins, Pokegears, Counter Catches, none of those are active when you have Budew in play. You also can't use Rare Candy, so Stage 2 decks, it's honestly mainly for Stage 2 decks. Stage 2 decks do not like this guy. 10 out of 10, it's on site. If Charizard sees Budew, it's on site, but it's not going to be on site because Charizard won't see Budew because it'll still be a Charmander because he can't evolve. So what are we looking at today? Today we are going to be taking a look at honestly what is probably my favorite deck right now. So recently we were watching the Houston Regionals, which saw a deck win that I think was Mega Absol won, but that honestly wasn't the highlight of the show. The highlight for me was definitely the two Budew Munkidori Froslass decks in top 8. There was one played by Alex Szymanski, and that is the one that we're going to take a look at today. Alex is a very talented player who has done and achieved a lot in his career. He's won EUIC before, and he is just a great player all in all. He used to play a lot of Terrorbox, so I would keep up with him, but recently he swapped over to this deck. And I'm not gonna lie, this deck is incredibly fun. If anyone loves to play single prize decks, this is probably the best single prize deck in the game right now. It just has so much versatility. So, what is this deck? So you guys have been kind of looking at the deck list because it's been on screen for a while, but here is the idea. You have a 4-3-1 line of the Froslass. However, we will get to the Mega Froslass a little bit later. For now, let's focus on the Snorunt and the Froslass. There is a very big buff that came out most recently for Froslass line in general, and that is the fact that Snorunt now has 70 HP, which is incredibly important because Dragapult doesn't just snipe Snorunts, which was super cool for Dragapult to do because it meant it could just knock out a Budew inactive and then put 6 damage onto a Snorunt and leave 0 damage in play for you to move around. It was just kind of a bit like gatekeeping this deck a little bit. So 70 HP Snorunt is actually really important. Then we have Munkidori, which is funnily enough the main damage aspect of this deck. So the idea of this deck is quite simple. What we do is we set up multiple Frostlasses, and then we will also set up multiple Munkidoris. The Frostlass ability is called Freezing Shroud, which says, during Pokemon Checkup, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon that has an ability, both yours and your opponent's. Very simple. In between turns, any Pokemon has ability takes 1 damage. So if I pass, I take a damage, and when you pass, I'll take another damage, totaling 2 damage in between those 2 turns. So what happens when you have multiple of these set up? Well, you do more damage. If you have 2 of them set up, you're going to be doing 4 damage each turn, because it's going to be 2 passing and then 2 passing back, so 4. And if you have 3, it's going to be 6, so the numbers ramp up really quickly. But why does this matter? Why do we want to damage our own Pokemon? Well, that's because Munkidori has an amazing ability called Adrenabrain. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon has any dark energy attached to it, you may move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So the idea is we have multiple Froslasses in play and multiple Munkidoris in play, and we are continuously fling damage to our opponent's side, which is really important because that's kind of how we deal damage. There's nothing else in this deck that does actual damage, to be honest. We have Budew, which is our primary attacker, actually. But we aren't looking at the 10 damage. Sure, this 10 damage can be really important in some matchups, such as the Zoroark matchup, because it hits them for weakness, so you actually are able to charge up that damage a little bit faster, but we are mainly there for the item lock. The idea is to slow our opponent down and pick off their smaller Pokemon with Munkidori throughout the game, preventing them from ever setting up, or even when they do set up, preventing them from just having access to that crucial part of their deck, the items, and just keep clogging up their hand and just kind of making the game as uncomfortable for our opponents as possible. And we do have a few things that kind of supplement this idea. We have Pseudo Wudo, which prevents our opponent from retreating, so if they have a lot of liabilities on the board, such as Serendipity, such as Latias, we can bring up those liabilities and prevent them from retreating, and then we can just use our Munkidori and Froslass to continuously ping around that Latias, stalling our opponent. And then we have Ting Lu, which is a very interesting card. So it has Ground Catcher, which does 30 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon, but you can only do that if there's a stadium in play and you have to discard that stadium, which is really, it's pretty cool because you do play 3 Artisan, and obviously a lot of other decks play stadiums as well. Other decks will also probably want to bump your Artisan, so there's going to be a stadium in play quite often. For example, Dragapult has Jamming Towers, and they'll want to put Jamming Towers in play to prevent you from using Bravery Charms and prevent you from using TM Devo and prevent you from getting value out of your Air Balloon. There's Guardy, which will also have Artisan, and sometimes the Watchtower Stadium. Then there's decks that play Battle Cage, and this is just another nice way to get rid of the Battle Cage because you have to discard the stadium. So it's also a good way to speed up your game plan. If your opponent is essentially just going to go just try and, you know, speed run killing your Budews, because let's be real, your Budew's probably going to die every single turn, then you can kind of like speed up the process where they take damage across their entire field with the Ting Lu, because it's doing 30 damage each turn, and it does have a little bit more HP, which just can be a little bit awkward sometimes for some decks to deal with. For example, if Zoroark isn't playing Reshiram, 140 is actually a pretty odd number to deal with, because if they use the Zekrom second attack, Rampaging Thunder, which is 250 damage, they can't attack next turn, so it's just not effective or efficient for them to deal with Ting Lus. So it can be a little bit awkward, but mainly you're just watching, you want the damage, right? To spread the damage so that later on in the game you can use TM Devo and get more value out of that card. Then you have Shaman. Shaman is really good against matchups like Grimmsnarl, good against matchups like Gardevoir, because it prevents them from targeting your Froslasses and targeting your Munkidoris. It's also a good way to deal with Water Ogerpon. Obviously, Water Ogerpon isn't the biggest thing in the game right now, but it is just nice to kind of have an out against that. If you don't want to play the Shaman, I would probably be playing the Psyduck, because that could help a lot with the Dragapult matchup, and also the Charizard Dusk Noir, that guy, matchup as well, because obviously it prevents them from blowing up. And then we have the biggest buff of the deck that Ascended Heroes has brought us, Pokepad. Pokepad just makes this deck a lot more consistent. That's about it. It just makes the deck so much more consistent, because we don't have to play TM Evo or multiple Ultra Balls now to consistently find our Frostlasses. We can actually just go straight into item lock. A problem with this deck was that before this format, you were playing TM Evo, and then you would have to use TM Evo to get your Froslasses in play. But since you were using TM Evo, you weren't using Itchy Pollen, which meant your opponent had items and had 1 extra turn of items. And that's just super important, because it meant those decks that did end up going first have a chance to rare candy into their stage 2s from as early as, you know, turn 2. So now that that problem is solved, we can play Pokepad and get our other guys a lot more efficiently while just consistently item locking them throughout the entire game. But now let's get to Pokemon that you guys have been looking at for a while, Mega Froslass. So why is Mega Froslass included? Mainly for its first attack. So its first attack just does 50 damage for each card in your opponent's hand. However, I'm not too sure if Mega Froslass fits this deck that well. I honestly am not too sure, because Iono is just a really good card in the current format, and a lot of decks in the late game will be spamming Iono, so a lot of the times they won't have a big, you know, hand, and a lot of times you won't have just spare Snoruns on the bench to evolve into a Mega Froslass. That's why I think the better option to Mega Froslass is probably the Bear Ursaluna. Might be a little bit better than Mega Froslass, but this is Alex Schmansky's decklist, and he did really well at the event with it, so take that with a grain of salt. That's just my personal opinion. I think Ursaluna might be a little bit more effective of attacker than Mega Froslass. However, that's not to say Mega Froslass isn't good. The one thing that Mega Froslass can do that Ursaluna can't do is actually put on early game pressure. For example, against decks like Mega Kangaskhan, where they don't really have many abilities, right? Let's be real. They do have abilities, but in this matchup, they're probably not going to put too many abilities in play, right? However, what they do is draw a lot of cards. They have the Kangaskhan, which is constantly drawing them cards throughout the game, and they're also worth 3 prize cards. So what does that mean? That means you can set up a Mega Froslass once they do get into the Absol and just one-shot it, right? Or one-shot a Kangaskhan, which sometimes is actually pretty good, because they might not have a good way to respond to the Mega Froslass. And that then from the next turn, like, you don't actually have to, you know, knock out another Mega. You can just go for something like the Latias, or the Peckrunt, or the Fezandipity, or the Bench Munkidoris, and just take your last 3 like that. So Mega Froslass can get a little bit more aggressive in the more like early to mid stages of the game, whereas Ursaluna can't. Ursaluna is only at the end of the game. As for the supporters, it is a really consistent deck with supporter lines because we don't have a built-in draw engine, so we want to see supporters basically every single turn. That's why we're running Secret Box as well, because Secret Box can piece together some really nice combos. We can get odds on for another, you know, Munkidori, we can get our TM Devo, we can get our Energy Surge to get one of our energies to set up another Munkidori as well, and then probably like a Lily or an Iono for the following turn, or even a Hilda, which can then go ahead and set up a Froslass and also grab an energy, meaning we can actually save that Energy Surge and grab something else like a Counter Catcher or a Night Stretcher if we need. So it just opens up a lot of combos in this deck, which is really cool because this deck is very much so a combo heavy deck. There are a lot of these decks I think running around right now because it's a pretty good format for Munkidori. I think Grimmsnarl is arguably the best deck in the format, to be honest, if played and built correctly. It has a good matchup against Dragapult. Gardevoir is falling off as well, and Gardevoir was, you know, one of the main threats for Dragapult. So Dragapult being, you know, very heavily favored in the format, it means if you have a good matchup into Dragapult, there's a good chance you're going to be pretty good in the format. And this is a deck that has a pretty good matchup spread into Dragapult, in my opinion. Like I said, if you want to improve that matchup even more, you can go ahead and play Psyduck. However, sometimes, I mean, they don't really want to pop bombs at times because they don't want to give you prize cards. So this is a pretty good deck because you can play slow and your whole goal is to drag out the game for as long as possible. And in a format where a lot of the best decks in the game are a little bit slower and take a little bit more time to set up, this deck has a lot of merit to it. I was working on a much longer video, however my power went out today and the fucking video corrupted and I'm super pissed off because it was an hour and 7 minutes long. It was like 25 gigabytes. I had so much footage. And the worst part is I can't even like redo that video because the footage that I was like editing, I deleted it off of my phone, and as soon as it was in the file of you guys don't care. Anyway, I had a long video that being put up and it's gone now. A little rant, nothing to do with Pokemon, nothing to do with the channel. Well, actually, something to do with Pokemon because it was going to be a Pokemon. Anyway, guys, I'm a little bit pissed off about that. So what am I going to go do now? I'm going to go to sleep and think of a deck to play for the SBE because that is coming up very quickly and I don't know what to play yet because the format in South Africa is very odd. Many things to think about, many things to do. So little time, so many things to do.